Have you ever really thought about mannequins? They are just hollow, lifeless figures designed to look human. But have you ever wondered if they watch you when you are not looking? I know how it sounds, paranoid, maybe even crazy. But after what happened at that Target store, I will never see those blank faces the same way again. I was desperate for a job. Bills were piling up, rent was due, and buying groceries felt like a luxury. Then I saw the job listing, simple and direct. Night cleaner needed, no experience required, $18 per hour. Apply now. It was not an ideal job, but I was not in a position to be selective. Winters in Minneapolis do not care if you are broke. The store was huge, its bright red Target signs glowing against the dull evening sky. As I pulled into the parking lot, an uneasy feeling crept over me. For a store that stayed open 24 hours, it was too quiet. I told myself it was just nerves. A first night at a new job can do that. The manager, Greg, met me inside. He was a wiry man in his mid-40s with a sharp, no-nonsense attitude. His uniform was spotless, but his face told a different story. His eyes were sunken, dark, as if he had not slept in years. He barely looked at me as he handed me a mop and bucket. "You will be cleaning the store after closing, 11 o'clock to 7 o'clock. Simple enough, right?" he said, not waiting for a response. Then he handed me a laminated sheet of paper. Its edges were worn, as if it had been handled too many times. "The rules," he said. I looked at the list, confused. The rules were strange. Rule 1. Always mop in straight lines. No circles, no swirls. Rule 2. If the mannequin in aisle 6 is facing west, do not touch it. Just leave it as it is. Rule 3. Check the mirrors in the fitting rooms every hour. If something feels off, call me immediately. Rule 4. Never stir the mop water after midnight. Rule 5. If you hear whistling, stop what you are doing and leave the aisle immediately. I asked Greg about the mannequin, about the whistling. He simply waved me off. "You will be fine. Just do your jobs and do not ask questions." There was something about his tone that made the hairs on my neck rise. Still, I told myself it was just my nerves acting up again. After all, this was just a cleaning job. How bad could it really be? Once Greg left, the store felt massive. The bright fluorescent lights cast long, empty aisles into the distance. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the hum of the lights and the occasional creak of the heating system. It was just me, my mop bucket, and the list of rules tucked into my apron pocket. I decided to start in the back of the store and work my way forward. I followed the instructions carefully, mopping in straight lines. It seemed like a strange rule, but it was easy enough to follow. But something about this place felt off. My mind drifted as the wet mop glided across the tile, the steady swishing sound, almost hypnotic. Then I remembered the rules and checked my watch. Midnight was only 15 minutes away. Rule 4 echoed in my mind. never stir the mop water after midnight. I glanced at the bucket. The surface of the water shimmered under the store's harsh lighting, reflecting the glow above. It looked normal at first, but small bubbles had started forming near the edges. I ignored it and moved on to the next aisle. That was when I saw it, the mannequin. It stood in aisle 6, exactly as the rules described. A smooth, featureless figure made of white plastic, dressed in a red polo shirt and khaki pants, the typical Target uniform. At first, I paid it little attention, but then the rule came back to me. If the mannequin in aisle 6 is facing west, do not touch it. Just leave it alone. I was not even sure which direction was west, but something about the mannequin unsettled me. Its head was slightly tilted, almost as if it were observing me. I stepped closer, trying to see if its position had changed. It had not, but as I moved around it, I could have sworn the angle of its head shifted just a tiny bit. I froze. "Okay, Rachel, you are imagining things," I whispered to myself. But in the vast silence of the store, my voice sounded too loud. I immediately regretted speaking, deciding it was best to avoid aisle 6 for now. I turned away. Whatever was happening with that mannequin, I wanted nothing to do with it. Instead, I headed to the fitting rooms, remembering another rule. Check the mirrors every hour. The fitting rooms were dimly lit, the overhead lights flickering weakly as I approached. A cold sensation crawled up my spine. Stepping inside, I saw mirrors lining the walls, their reflections bouncing endlessly between them. At first, everything looked normal. Then I noticed something just beyond the main reflection's reach. A faint smudge, a shadow. I leaned in, squinting. It was gone. "Great," I muttered, stepping back. My heartbeat quickened, but I forced myself to check the rest of the mirrors. Each one was clean. Nothing seemed out of place. Still, an uneasy feeling lingered, as though I was being watched. Then I heard it. A whistle, slow, purposeful, coming from the far end of the fitting rooms. I did not wait to find out what it was. My legs moved before my mind could catch up, and I was out of there within seconds. Back in the open aisles, the whistling stopped, but the sense of unease did not. I glanced back at the fitting rooms. Silent. Still. Too still. Taking a deep breath, I returned to my mop bucket, gripping the handle tightly, as if it could somehow protect me. I told myself it was just my imagination. First nights at new jobs were always strange. That had to be the reason for my nerves. I forced myself to focus on mopping. The rhythmic swishing of the mop was oddly comforting, a steady sound in the otherwise empty store. I let myself fall into the pattern, trying to push the unease away. Then the whispers began. At first, they were so soft that I mistook them for the hum of the fluorescent lights, a faint, static-like murmur coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. I stopped, mop in hand, and slowly turned in a circle, scanning the aisles. The whispers ceased. "Hello?" I called out hesitantly. No response. I shook my head, and returned to work. But almost immediately, the whispers started again. This time, they were louder. Not static voices, multiple voices, overlapping, speaking in hushed, hurried tones, just beyond my understanding. The words were slurred and garbled, but there was an urgency to them, a pressing weight in the air. "Greg, this is not funny," I muttered under my breath, even though I knew he had left hours ago. The whispers followed me as I moved through the store, never coming from a single direction, but instead surrounding me, pressing closer with every step. My stomach twisted, and I clenched my teeth, trying to suppress the rising panic. I glanced at my watch. 12:45 a.m. 15 more minutes until my first hourly mirror check. I forced myself to keep mopping, making sure to move in straight lines as the rules instructed. The whispers seemed to fade as long as I stayed focused on my task. But the moment my mind drifted, they returned, louder than before. Then the mannequin moved. I was in aisle 7 when I heard it. A soft scraping sound, plastic against tile. My head snapped around, my heart pounding. The mannequin from aisle 6 was now standing at the end of aisle 7. Its blank, featureless face was tilted slightly in my direction. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No way." I stepped back slowly, gripping the mop handle tightly, as if it could protect me. The mannequin did not move, but I could not shake the feeling that it was watching me. Even though it had no eyes, its empty face radiated something dark and unsettling. I stumbled into the fitting rooms, feeling slightly safer among the mirrors, though the sense of security was fleeting. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening. They carried an urgency, like they were trying to warn me, but I could not understand what they were saying. With shaking hands, I pulled the list of rules from my pocket and scanned it desperately. My eyes landed on Rule 3. If the mannequin moves, you have already made a mistake. Retrace your steps and do not look back. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Retrace my steps? What did that even mean? And why was I not supposed to look back? The whispers rose to an unbearable pitch. The fluorescent lights flickered wildly, throwing the aisles into sudden bursts of darkness. I had no choice but to follow the rule. Taking a deep breath, I turned and walked backward, carefully retracing my steps. My movements were slow and deliberate. With each step, the whispers softened, growing fainter until they became nothing more than a distant murmur. I could feel the mannequin's presence behind me, its unseen gaze pressing against my back. But I did not turn around. I would not break the rule. Finally, I reached the mop bucket. The whispers stopped. Silence filled the store, but it was not comforting. It was thick and heavy, like the air before a storm. I took a deep breath, my chest rising and falling, as I tried to calm myself. My hands trembled. I checked my watch. 12:59 a.m. 1 minute until the first mirror check. 1 o'clock. Exactly the time stated in the rules for the first mirror inspection. I tightened my grip on the mop handle, my knuckles turning white. As I approached the fitting rooms, a cold sweat trickled down my spine. The mirrors stood in perfect rows, their surfaces shimmering slightly under the fluorescent lights. The reflections looked unnaturally sharp, almost too clear. "You can do this, Rachel," I whispered, trying to steady my nerves. "It is just a mirror. A simple, ordinary mirror." The rules were clear. At the top of every hour, check the fitting room mirrors. If something looks different, leave immediately. Do not run. I hated that part. What did different mean? What exactly was I supposed to look for? And why was running forbidden? My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I stepped in front of the first mirror. It was just me. Messy ponytail, dark circles under my eyes, red Target uniform. I let out a shaky breath, laughing softly at my own fear. See? Nothing to. Then I saw it. My reflection blinked, but I had not. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The image in the mirror was now still, perfectly mimicking my posture. But I knew what I had seen. I had not blinked. It had. My mind raced, fighting against the instinct to run. The rules. The damn rules. I could not run. Not yet. Slowly, I stepped backward, keeping my eyes locked on the reflection. It stared back, unblinking. Its expression was completely blank. I stumbled into the next fitting room, my hands shaking as I moved toward the second mirror. This time, it was not my face that was wrong. It was my shadow. The overhead lights cast a clear shadow of me against the wall. But in the mirror, my shadow was different. It moved on its own, a slight tilt of the head, a small shift in the arms. The changes were subtle, just enough that I could almost convince myself I was imagining it. Almost. I gripped the mop handle tighter, as if it could anchor me. My eyes burned with unshed tears. Something was very, very wrong. The whispers had returned, faint at first, but growing stronger with each passing second. The fitting room seemed endless, the mirrors stretching and distorting as I moved. I muttered under my breath, my voice unsteady. "This is fine. It is fine. Just follow the rules. Do not panic." I forced myself to walk toward the third mirror, the last one I needed to check. My reflection appeared normal, but then it moved. It slowly lifted a hand and waved at me, even though my own arms remained stiff at my sides. A scream rose in my throat, but I swallowed it down and turned away, walking quickly toward the exit. The air became heavier with each step, pressing against me like an unseen force. That eerie wave was burned into my mind, a twisted version of my own movements. By the time I reached the fitting room exit, the whispers had disappeared, leaving only a heavy, unnatural silence. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my breathing, and glanced at my watch. 1:05 a.m. I had survived the first mirror check, but the night was far from over. The store felt different after the mirror incident, as if the air itself had thickened. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above me, the only sound breaking the silence as I pushed the mop bucket toward the cleaning supplies aisle. My hands trembled with every step, the memory of my reflection's wave still fresh in my mind. I knew I had to keep moving. Standing still felt unsafe, as if something would find me if I lingered too long. The rules had never mentioned the mannequins, but as I stepped into the main aisle leading toward the employee break room, they caught my attention. The mannequins, usually displayed near the seasonal decorations, now stood in a loose semicircle. They had been moved. I stopped, gripping the mop handle tightly. Their blank faces were slightly tilted toward me, their stiff limbs casting unnatural shadows under the harsh lights. "It is nothing," I whispered, trying to convince myself. "Just a weird display setup." They remained still, of course, but something about their stillness felt intentional, watchful. I hesitantly took a step forward, my eyes locked on the nearest figure, a headless female mannequin dressed in an outdated holiday sweater. My pulse quickened as I noticed something odd. Its outstretched hand held a crumpled piece of paper. Curiosity and dread clashed inside me as I moved closer. The paper trembled slightly, as if caught in a breeze I could not feel. Slowly, I reached out and took it. The moment I pulled the note from the mannequin's hand, a faint scraping sound echoed through the aisle, like something being dragged across the polished floor. My head snapped up, but the mannequins had not moved, or had they? The semicircle seemed smaller now, the figures standing closer together, as if silently communicating. I unfolded the paper. The message was written in smeared red ink. "They see you. Do not go near the loading dock." A cold feeling settled in my stomach as I read the words again. The handwriting was hurried, desperate. The ink had a faint metallic scent. Blood. I shoved the paper into my pocket and stepped back, my heart pounding. The mannequins remained frozen, but their presence loomed over me. I did not trust them. The rules had never mentioned them, but I could not shake the feeling that they were watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. The loading dock was next on my cleaning schedule. I checked the clock. 2:15 a.m. The rules stated that I had to sweep the stockroom by 2:30, but it was dangerously close to the loading dock. I hesitated, my mind racing. I could ignore the note, pretend I had never seen it. But what if breaking the rules was even worse? What if ignoring them attracted the thing that had written the warning? I took a shaky breath and gripped the mop handle like a weapon. "Just follow the rules," I whispered to myself. "Stick to the rules, and you will be fine." But deep down, I was not so sure. The stockroom door let out a long, low groan as I pushed it open. The air inside was colder, an icy chill biting at my skin despite the humid warmth of the mop water sloshing behind me. The fluorescent lights flickered above, casting erratic shadows along the towering shelves packed with boxes. I hesitated at the entrance, gripping the mop handle tighter, as if it could protect me. My mind kept replaying the warning written on the crumpled paper. "Do not go near the loading dock." And yet, from where I stood, I could already see it. The space was vast, filled with stacks of pallets, and a large roll-up door that led to the night outside. It was eerily quiet. Even the usual hum of the refrigerators was absent. As I stepped inside, the door creaked shut behind me with a loud click. I quickly turned around and saw that it had not only closed, but also locked. The doorknob would not budge, no matter how hard I twisted or pulled. I told myself to stay calm. "You have done this before," I whispered, trying to reassure myself. I turned away from the door and focused on the task at hand. The rules were clear. Sweep the stockroom by 2:30 a.m. I checked my watch. 2:17 a.m. There were still 13 minutes left, plenty of time if I did not waste it on panic. As I began sweeping, I became painfully aware of how enormous the stockroom was. My footsteps echoed in the silence, amplifying each sound. Shadows seemed to shift in the corners of my vision, but when I turned to look, there was nothing. That's when I heard it, a faint whispering. At first, I thought it was the wind, maybe a draft from the loading dock, but as I stopped to listen, I realized it was distinct words, voices, dozens of them, murmuring like a crowd just out of sight. I froze, gripping the mop tighter. The whispers grew louder and merged into a single word, repeating through the room. "Leave." My heart raced as I scanned the area, desperate to find the source. The boxes seemed to shift slightly, their shadows stretching unnaturally. I turned to look at the loading dock. The roll-up door was open. I remembered had been closed when I entered. The sight of it wide open, revealing the dark void beyond, made my stomach churn. My hands shook as I forced myself to take a step forward, then another. The rules had said nothing about an open loading dock, but the note had warned, "Don't go near the loading dock." The whispers grew louder, more urgent. They seemed to be coming from the dock now, calling me. I stopped a few feet away, staring into the darkness. That's when I saw it, two faint, glowing eyes staring back at me. They blinked. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The whispers turned into a low, guttural laugh that filled the room. Without thinking, I turned and ran, leaving the mop behind. The door to the stockroom was still locked, but I did not care. I threw my weight against it, desperate to escape. The door groaned, and then swung open. I rushed into the hallway, gasping for air, the laughter echoing behind me as the door slammed shut. I leaned against the wall, my body trembling. My watch read 2:29 a.m. I had technically finished the task, but something told me this was far from over. The hall outside the stockroom was unnervingly silent, a sharp contrast to the chaos I had just escaped. My hands trembled as I gripped the mop bucket, the water sloshing inside like a restless tide. The hallway lights now seemed dimmer, casting long, swaying shadows as though they were alive. I glanced at the clock on the wall, 2:34 a.m. I was late. The rules had been clear. Sweep the stockroom by 2:30 a.m. My chest tightened as I realized that, while I had technically finished the task, I had not done it on time. I tried to convince myself that a few minutes would not matter, that the rules were only there to scare me. But then I thought about the whispers and those eyes. I forced myself to move, dragging the mop bucket toward the break room. My knees felt weak, and every step was harder than the last. When I reached the door, I stopped. The mop bucket began to shake violently. The oily water inside bubbled, as if it were boiling. The sound of splashing filled the hallway, growing louder and louder, until it drowned out the pounding of my heart. Then it stopped. The water settled, becoming eerily calm. I stared down at the bucket. My reflection stared back at me, but it was not just my face. There was something behind me, a figure cloaked in shadow, with glowing hollow eyes that seemed to pierce my soul. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. Then I heard a creaking noise echo down the corridor. I turned towards it. The mannequins, the store's promotional mannequins, had been standing still at the front of the store earlier that night, but now they were here, lining the hallway. Their blank, plastic faces seemed to watch me, their hollow eyes following every move I made. "This cannot be happening," I whispered, slowly backing away. My foot caught on the mop bucket, and it tumbled to the floor, spilling its water across the tiles. The water spread like ink, and with it came a faint, echoing voice, "Rachel." I froze. The voice was unmistakable. It was mine. The mannequins began to move. Their heads twitched toward me in unison. Their arms creaked as they raised them, reaching out as if beckoning me forward. I staggered back, my body shaking with fear. And then I broke the final rule: do not run. My instincts screamed at me to escape, and I listened. I turned and sprinted down the hallway, my footsteps echoing like gunshots. The mannequins chased me, their plastic limbs clattering against the floor as they followed. The exit was right ahead, the glass doors shining like a sign of safety. But when I reached them, I realized they were not opening. The doors were locked, and I could only see my terrified reflection staring back at me. "Please let me out," I screamed, pounding on the glass. The mannequins stopped. Their hollow eyes burned into my back, and their shadows loomed over me. Then the voice came again, louder this time. "Rachel." I turned slowly, tears running down my face. The mannequins were no longer mannequins. They were people, former employees. Their faces were frozen in eternal terror, and among them I saw myself, my own face, staring back at me, frozen in plastic. The realization hit me like a train. I was not escaping. I had already joined them. Weeks passed, or maybe months. I could no longer tell. Time no longer moved in a normal way in here. The store was always lit by that cold, fluorescent light, the kind that drained color and left only shadows lurking just out of its reach. I could feel them watching, always just beyond sight, waiting for me to make another mistake. I was no longer Rachel, not completely. I was something else now, a part of the store, added to its growing collection. My body no longer moved as it used to. My movements were stiff and unnatural, like a puppet controlled by invisible strings. I could no longer blink, cry, or scream. The most I could do was stand perfectly still, a perfect replica of the Rachel I once was. They had placed me at the entrance, surrounded by mannequins. I wore the same store uniform I had hated on my first day, the name tag still crooked on my chest. Customers passed by, never sparing me a second glance. To them, I was just another piece of the store's decor, a frozen employee. But I was not alone. The others were with me. Each one of them was a former employee, just like me, trapped in this place. I could feel their silent screams in the air, a symphony of despair that only we could hear. We were now the store's guardians, cursed to enforce the rules we had once broken. Late at night, when the store was empty, I could hear the whispers again. They echoed through the aisles, a chorus of voices I knew all too well. They spoke of lives left behind, of families waiting for loved ones who would never return. Sometimes I could hear my own voice among them, calling out for help that would never come. The worst part was not the stillness, the suffocating silence, or the unblinking stares. It was the moments when I saw myself in the store's reflective surfaces, the shiny tile floors, the polished glass displays. My face stared back at me, distorted and hollow, unrecognizable. My eyes were no longer mine. They were filled with something ancient, something that had been waiting in the store long before I arrived. I had become the thing I feared most, a warning, a silent message to anyone who dared to break the rules. I could only hope that someday someone would notice the terror frozen in my plastic face and understand the warning I could no longer give. The final rule echoed through my mind, etched into my very being. The store keeps what it claims.